my outlook is based on not on faith, but on the actual encounter that I had in '74 with a mysterious, powerful, rational mind, which was unfathomable to me as to what it was, for what it called itself. It seemed to resemble Ubik in many respects. Ubik, the entity that I had written about in the novel by that title.
When you say an encounter, was this a sort of hallucination or a vision or something?
It was an invasion of my mind by a transcendently rational mind. It was almost as if I had been insane all my life, and suddenly I had become sane. Now, I've actually thought of that as a possibility, that I actually had been psychotic until 1974, from 1928 when I was born until March of 1974. But I don't think that's the case. I mean, I may have been somewhat whacked out, and somewhat eccentric for years and years and years. But I wasn't all that crazy, because I'd been given Rorschach tests and so on. This was a rational mind that was not a human rational mind. It was more like an artificial intelligence. Now, I don't pretend to know what it was. On Thursdays and Saturdays, I think it was God. On Tuesdays and Wednesdays, I think that it was extraterrestrials. Sometimes I think it was the Soviet Union, the Academy of Sciences, was trying out their psychotronic microwave telepathic I thought about that. I tried different theories,
Yeah.
I tried every theory. I thought of the Rosicrucians, I thought of the Russians, I thought of extraterrestrials, I thought of God, I thought of Christ.
Was it something you heard then, or was it more than that? Just trying to visualize the experience.
It invaded my mind and assumed control of my motor centers and did my acting and thinking for me.
But you had your own consciousness there as well.
Yeah, but I was a spectator to it.
Oh.
And it first of all, it set about healing me physically, and my little 4-year-old boy, had a undiagnosed birth defect. And this mind, whose identity was totally obscured to me. I even thought it might have been Elijah, it might have been the Holy Spirit. I thought of everything. All I can say is I don't know. Was that it was equipped with tremendous technical knowledge, engineering knowledge, medical knowledge, cosmological knowledge, philosophical knowledge. The first thing that it informed me was to be very wary of heavy metals. And I've even thought that it was one of the great Illuminati of history, one of the great Rosicrucians, like it might have been Paracelsus. I thought for a long time that it might have been Paracelsus. I thought it might be a previous incarnation of myself that had broken through. It had memories. It had memories dating back over 2,000 years. It spoke Greek. It spoke Hebrew. It spoke Sanskrit. There wasn't anything that it didn't seem to know. It immediately set about putting my affairs in order. It fired my agent. It fired my publisher. It was very practical. It decided that the apartment had not been vacuumed adequately and not recently enough. It decided that I should stop drinking wine entirely because of the sediment, and it turned out I had abundance of uric acid in my system, and switched me to beer. It made elementary mistakes. It kept calling the dog he and the cat she, which annoyed my wife since I knew and she knew that the dog was a female and the cat was a male. It kept calling her ma'am, and it would lapse into what turned out to be Koine Greek when it would fall into a contemplative state. She recognized it as Koine Greek because she'd taken some Attic Greek in school. I didn't even recognize it as a language. I thought it was just nonsense. It was very intelligent and had a firm and shrewd grasp of business matters. It remargined my typewriter's margining. I I even thought it might have been the soul of my friend Jim Pike come back from the dead. And I don't exclude the possibility either, Charles. I'm not willing to exclude the possibility that Jim Pike came back to me as his son Jimmy came back to him, because it had a tremendous interest in early Christian theology and in Zoroastrianism, which Jim Pike had confessed to me once he believed was probably the true religion. It was very versed in Zoroastrianism and knew a great deal about the Essenes and the therapeutic.
How did your wife perceive all this? Did you tell her what was going on?
Oh yes, we discussed it. She was impressed by the fact that because of the tremendous pressure that it put on people in my business, that I made quite a lot of money very rapidly. We began to get checks in for thousands of dollars, money that was owed me, that this mind was conscious existed in New York and had never been coughed up. It also wrote a letter to the Roman Catholic Church, informing the Roman Catholic Church that my writing contained allusions to the New Testament, which were to edify the Roman Catholic Church that a miracle had occurred, and that it was very busy and active. Does this interest you?
How could it not?
Okay. It had one overweening concern. This was in March of 1974. It informed me that a group of conspirators had murdered the Kennedys, Dr. King, and Bishop Pike. That it, the mind that had taken me over, had seen the conspirators. The mind then graphically represented itself as the Cumaean Sibyl.
Is the what?
The Sibyl of Cumae.
Oh, my logical knowledge is not very.
Well, the Cumaean Sibyl was the Roman equivalent of the Delphic Sibyl of Greece.
Oh.
The Cumaean Sibyl advised the Roman Republic when it was in danger. She had the so-called Sibylline books, which were consulted by the Roman Republic. Well, now I've let it out of the bag, haven't I? I said she. It was female. She was female. She had the Sibylline books. She showed me the Sibylline books. She said the Republic was in danger. She meant the American Republic. She said that once again the Empire threatened to take over. She was there to see that the Empire was destroyed. I shouldn't be saying this. This is really stupid of me, Charles. I shouldn't be talking about
I'll cut out anything that you want me to say.
No, I don't approve of that. I mean, if I'm indiscreet enough to say it, I don't necessarily want to censor it.
Well, wait a minute. I don't see it that way. I see it as sometimes you need to think carefully as to what you want to make public and what you don't. And you can't think carefully at the same time that you're talking.
Well, that's true. That's true.
So
Well, okay, most of it's in Valis anyway. She said that the oscillation between the Republic and the Empire was a constant in history. She caused me to see periods in history in which the Empire had been defeated. It took me 5 years to identify one of those periods. It turned out to be the War of the Spanish Lowlands. It turned out to be the beginning of the 17th century, in which the Dutch cities broke off from the Holy Roman Empire. She said that that was the situation now in the United States in 74, that the Republic was turning into an empire. And she said, and they shall be destroyed, for they are murderers. She then dictated a series of letters to Charles Wiggins. Charles Wiggins was on the House Judiciary Committee, sitting in on the decision as to whether to impeach President Nixon. She said to inform, she would dictate the letters. She dictated a series of letters to Congressman Wiggins. They dealt with constitutional law. I didn't understand the letters because they dealt with constitutional law. I know nothing about constitutional law. Later, I found out that Congressman Wiggins is such an authority on constitutional law that he was suggested as a possibility for the Supreme Court. He came from Fullerton, which is where I was living, and it was his practice to read every letter that came from Fullerton and to answer it. She revealed to me that she had moved me to Fullerton from Canada so that I could write to Charles Wiggins on the Judiciary Committee while they were sitting in judgment on whether they should vote out a bill of impeachment on President Nixon. She dictated a series of letters informing Congressman Wiggins that he had no loyalty to the President of the United States because the President had violated his oath of office, which was that he would uphold the Constitution of the United States. He had failed to do so. Charles Wiggins did not owe the President any loyalty, citing historical examples. Congressman Wiggins answered each letter in detail, and then she sent the final letter. The letter contained the information that the Nixon transcripts were forgeries. They did not correspond to the tapes. And if the tapes were released, it would show that the transcripts were forgeries. That letter she sent to the Wall Street Journal, which had published an editorial saying that the transcripts showed that Nixon was innocent and that we should believe him when he said that they corresponded to the tapes. She stated that the transcripts were self-serving, were not evidentiary, and that the tapes would show that the transcripts were forgeries. And at that point, she wound down her mission. But by that time, she had gotten me to the doctor. She had had me diagnosed, found a number of physical ailments that I had. My little boy had gone in for surgery and had his birth defect repaired, which was a life-threatening birth defect and could have killed him at any time. She did everything but paper the walls of the apartment. She told me about the article that would be coming out in Rolling Stone by Paul Williams. She told me that it would change my life.
What was it?
The article in Rolling Stone by Paul Williams about me.
Oh, that one.
Yeah, she told me that would be coming out. She said your friend Paul, she showed me the article, said your friend Paul will be doing an article about your troubles in Marin County. Mm. Yeah, at that point, Paul hadn't said to me anything about it. Mm. She also said that she would stay on as my tutelary spirit. I had to look up tutelary to know what it meant. She had the unfortunate habit of lapsing into Greek. And then, having healed me, calmed me, she presented me with the beatific vision. She showed me a garden of such beauty that I could not believe it existed. And I walked around in it. I was actually in it. She transformed the landscape for me. Palm trees, beauty of indescribable beauty, just indescribable beauty. And she said, when you get old and are dying, I will come back for you and take you there. But she said, I will not come back until then. She says, I have to leave now. So, I don't know who she was. She appeared as Aphrodite at one point. At one time, I said, who are you? Tell me who you are, for God's sake. Tell me who you are. And she said, think of me as Diana. Mm-hmm. She said, for me, everything is permitted. Diana, I looked up Diana. She turns out she was the Roman patroness of slaves. She was loved by the lower classes. In addition to all these things, she solved a problem facing me, which was of such gravity that it probably was the greatest crisis of my life. Uh, at that point, she described herself as a holy wisdom and applied the powers of holy wisdom to the problem. But at another time, she described herself as the spirit of Erasmus. Uh, and finally, she said that she was essentially playing a game, that she loved to play games, and that none of the things she described about herself, her identity, were correct. That I would never know who she was. That she I heard the beautiful bells in the distance, and whenever the most beautiful bell, but she finally said that I would never know who she was.
You know, a lot of people, if anyone heard this transcript, which, as far as I'm concerned, they won't, because I regard this as a very special conversation, they would think you were putting me on. I could hear Norman Spinrad, for instance.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I've taken notes on this, and I have almost 500,000 words of notes that I've taken. When Valis comes out, see, probably by the time your interview comes out, Valis will have come out. And
Well, what's the publication?
they haven't set a date. They're trying to get a hardcover, Songland's hardcover edition.
Well, this book is vaguely scheduled for May of 80.
Well, it
Might be.
it's hard for me to say,
Yeah.
because Bannon can publish real fast. I wrote a lot of it up in Valis.
But is Valis then a novel or a mixture?
It's a mixture of autobiography, fiction, and dramatic devices from the modern theater, from Pirandello and Barry.
I did enough to read it.
I don't pretend to know who she was. She said conflicting things. I spend between 4 and 8 hours a day doing research in history to find where anybody's had an experience like this. I can't find an example.
I just keep seeing you as being a natural focus for some strange new religions.
She, at one point, I was convinced that I was dealing with a computer. I said, "Would you tell me where you?" I said, "All right, I'll tell you. I'll make a deal. Will you tell me where you are?" She said, "I'm in the Portuguese states of America." I said, "There are no Portuguese states of America." But she was able to solve intricate problems that I was facing. She loved puzzles. She still loves puzzles. She loves puzzles. And she was fascinated by a puzzle. Crisis for me was a serious crisis. It was a puzzle involving my anti-war activities and my political affiliations. She saw in it, I think, a chance to solve a puzzle that was a Chinese finger trap. The harder you tried to solve it, the further away you got. And she saw an opportunity to. I'm really convinced that her love of puzzles was just too much. She couldn't resist.
I'm reminded suddenly of that series of events in We Can Build You, where Mr. Lincoln keeps solving puzzles.
Yeah.
On a very trivial basis.
So I had to write a book about this, and I just construed her as a rational mind breaking into the irrational universe. So I call her vast, active, living intelligence, which is a description, simply a description of vast, active, living intelligence. She's an organized system. And
do you recognize the possibility, however remote, that you could have in some way been talking to yourself, that in some way you could have known everything that she knew.
Yes, it could have been a dialogue between the two hemispheres of my brain, as we find in Scanodarkly. There was my right hemisphere. It could have been a second ecosystem, a second self system in my head.
But you prefer not to believe
Um, this was suggested to me by at least one person.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly Scanner, which had already been written,
Yes.
I had already written Scanner, although I hadn't published it, suggests that I have two psyches in my head, one in each hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
And the right hemisphere personality broke through,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the anima in Jungian terms, my anima and anima.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's only one thing that happened, which when I think that, when I think to myself, I have another personality, and that was it, is that she interfered with a sequence of causal events
Mm-hmm.
in my environment.
Mm-hmm.
She was actually present as an extra, or appeared present. Now, she may not have been. It may have been a projection from my own mind onto my reality, onto my environment.
But I mean, the cases that I've read of multiple personalities.
Well, I think it's a good possibility. The only thing is that she was armed with ferocious knowledge.
That of course, is the part which is so fascinating.
She was so shrewd, and she continued to. She had first spoken to me in high school during a physics test in the 11th grade. I wasn't able to solve any of the 10 questions. 8 dealt with or based on Archimedes' principle, and I didn't know the principle, so I couldn't solve the 8 questions of the 10. And all of a sudden, her voice cut in, and she said she explained Archimedes' principle to me. She explained the principle in theory, and then she showed the application to each one of the 8 questions. And I said, well, now I'll test this out and see if there's anything to this by examining the grade that I got. And of the 10 questions, 1 was wrong, and it was one of the first 2, which I had done. And all 8 that she had done were correct. I got an A on the test and an A in the question.
Are you now saying then that this is a voice which has broken through to you over the years?
Just 2 times before then, and once in the 60s. And also she had put a great deal of material in my novels, which she was very proud of. She was not reticent about that. She drew my attention to material she had put in Ubik, Flow My Tears, Faith of Our Fathers.
You know, there is nothing that I like better than to have my worldview shaken up.
She said to me, the last thing she said to me was last week. She said to me, for the first time she used the word I, speaking of herself. She said, I make moves which you cannot understand. And I knew, that she would always elude me, and that she knew she would always elude me, and she knew I would always try to understand it.
Did she tell you anything about talking about this?
She told me 2 things never to tell.
Oh.
So I inferred from that it was all right to tell the rest.
Oh. No, I just wondered if she sort of said, when someone turns up with a tape recorder, do this.
She told me 2 things not to tell. And as I say, I just inferred it was all right. I'm quite reticent normally about this. I do not. I've talked to my priest about it, and I've talked to a couple of my close friends, and of course my ex-wife knows about it. And several people that I correspond with, I've discussed it. And I tried to discuss it with Ursula Le Guin, and she just wrote and said, I think you're crazy. And sent back the material. I sent her some material. She mailed it back to me and said, I think you're crazy. So that of course, I didn't tend to discuss it very much, but when Valis comes out, a lot of it's going to be Valis. So I'm less reticent than I was. But This is 5. We're talking about 5 years, and we're talking about an entity which had spoken to me in high school in the '60s, and who also has saturated my writing with pre-Socratic philosophy. I remember in '74 I was being interviewed by a French guy who was doing his dissertation for the French PhD, and he asked me about the Empedoclean philosophy in Ubik, and I said I had never read Empedocles, and he got so angry that although he'd flown all the way from France to interview me, he got up and left. He said, "You're a liar." He said, "You've got whole sections of Empedocles." And I later read Empedocles, and he was correct. But she was an authority on Greek philosophy. That was her speciality. She loved that all, the Heraclitus and Xenophanes and Parmenides. She loved the paradoxes of Zeno, but she disapproved of his arguing any point. She disapproved of the sophists. She highly disapproved of the sophists. But she showed me the Sibylline books. They were really something. In the Sibylline books was listed the entire history of human civilization. She didn't show me all. My God, we're tremendous. She just showed me passages here and there.
I have more than I can cope with.
Oh dear. I've wrecked your whole trip to California.
No. You've enriched it.
Oh, she told me what was damaging the people's brains up there on the drugs. Mercury. Traces of mercury.
Where? What do you mean specifically?
In the Bay Area. Remember when I
Area.
said this brain dysfunction? She said it was mercury. It's bichloride of mercury. She specifically said bichloride. And by the way, I didn't know that bichloride was bichloride of mercury. She just said bichloride. And I found out later that it was bichloride of mercury.
Yeah.
And she also referred to mercury orally taken later. Specifically, she said aspirin of mercury. She was always very cryptic. She forced me to go to reference books. But aspirin of mercury would be mercury taken orally, he said, as a medicine, as a pill. Trace amounts of heavy metals in the drugs that were being distributed in the streets.
Yeah. So I've only ever taken prescription drugs. What else is in the drug ingredients? No, that's not it.
Well, Burroughs' theory is that junkies are really addicts of heavy metals.
Really?
The thing they're looking for in the heroin, the body is searching for is the heavy metals. That's the real addictive part of it. That's William Burroughs' theory.
Right. I'm going to turn this thing off.